Some may have been born to boogie, but you are an engineer. You were born to build things. You're born to break things. You're born to take things apart and hopefully put them back together again. You're a natural-born researcher, an explorer of the world around you. And now there's just one thing standing between you and what you love. What's that, Professor? Documentation. Specifically, it's a paper. Hey, what it is doesn't really matter. What it's about doesn't really matter. What matters is it stands between you and what you love. It takes you from doing what you love and into a world of unpleasantness. Now when I say it that way, perhaps it doesn't sound so harsh for me to say that engineers dread writing. But we all know that engineers need to be able to communicate. You need to be able to write, and you need to be able to speak. At the very least, you need to be able to communicate your brilliance, or prove your worth, possibly even your net worth. Let's think about the paperclip. Let's imagine that the person who invented that was so inept, he was not able to tell you how it was made. He wasn't able to tell you about the bends that make the paperclip. He wasn't even able to tell you it was made of metal. I don't know, maybe he spoke gibberish. Anyway, he was not even able to market it. Hey, this is something that you can use to hold paper together and use it again to hold paper together. You can use it to pick locks. And sometime in the future, when Marty McFly is flying around, you can use it to hit that mechanical release on DVD players and retrieve that lost DVD. Indeed, it's that useful, but you never know that because this guy wasn't able to tell you. And so the paperclip was lost to history. Instead, you had to live with the staple. Well, not the stapler. The staple. You had to live with the staple. And you had to live with the binder clip. And eventually, paperless, so that you just never knew what you ever missed. It's terrible. You can't let this happen to you. Companies don't want that to happen to them. They need engineers who are able to communicate. That's why they put in their job descriptions, must have good communication skills. Now that may or may not be wishful thinking, depending on the applicant, but the desire is there, and in fact the need is there. So if you have writing skills, that can give you a real edge in getting a job. Universities also not only need engineers who can communicate, they require them to. At the graduate level and as professors, you have to be able to publish. It's the land of publish or perish. And so they've actually taken a lead role in educating engineering students in this area, in teaching them how to write. My contention is that the approach is too ambitious. And instead of teaching the majority of engineering students how to write, it causes them to panic at the words essay or paper. And that's not the desired result. I usually like to illustrate this sense of panic by telling a story about a group of engineering students who are facing down their arch nemesis, English 101. Now these students signed up for English 101 because it was marked required, and because the advanced class on deterministic, stochastic, paradoxical processes, having a more tolerable pain threshold, was already filled by those who managed to register early. These students, having a high sense of duty, march into the classroom fearing the worst. And true to form, the English professor comes in and he looks downright unhappy. Why, you may ask, does he look unhappy? Well, he went to a meeting with other English professors where they were deciding on who would get to teach what. And instead of getting to teach the graduate level class on Shakespearean poetry, this professor gets to teach remedial math, in his mind at least, to engineering students. You know, people who don't necessarily want to write and don't necessarily have the gift for it. Well, maybe some of them do, but not most of them. This professor also has a sense of duty, and so he starts the class off anyway, despite his bad morning. For this class, you will be writing 5 papers. We will be starting with a small 4-page paper. 4-page paper! Boom! It hits the students like Sherman tanks rolling through Europe. 4-page paper! Did he use the word small with that? Ah! The professor carries on. You may use footnotes or you may use endnotes in your paper, but please don't use both. That's just not proper. For your references, you'll be using the APA format. That has nothing to do with physics. It's the American Psychology Association. Meanwhile, the students are still thinking about 4-page paper. They think of it's like a neon sign in a dark alley. Just blazoning on their mind. The professor carries on. You will use a proper introduction, body, and conclusion in your paper. If you have any questions, please refer to your text. But meanwhile, 4-page papers hammering in the students' mind, just bam, bam. One student hyperventilating, another one passed out entirely. Yet a third one is holding on to consciousness just long enough to wonder, why does the English netherworld afflict us with its sadistic professors? Now I do apologize if you are offended by my dramatization. That is not my intention. I would like to assure you that no English professors or engineering students were harmed in the making of this dramatization, unless you count my personal pain that I went through every time I had a writing assignment in undergrad. Yes, indeed, I panicked when I had to write. I was not up for the job there. Thankfully, I had one liberal arts class, a class in philosophy. It was actually my last liberal arts class, and that's where it came together. That's where I learned how to write. And it's a good thing too, because 3 years later, I went to graduate school. And graduate school, I had some hefty writing assignments there. One of them was like 25 to 30 pages. May not sound like a lot to you. Personally, that was a lot for me. On top of that, I was the TA for Electronics Lab 1 and 2. In Electronics Lab 1 and 2, I had to, I was required to assign a lab report for each lab that I did. So for each lab session these students went into, they had to write a lab report. You can imagine how happy they were. What was even worse was when I got the papers back and started reading through them, I found that they had trouble writing one coherent paragraph, let alone a cohesive paper, or lab report in this case. That was 8 out of 10 of them. Apparently I'd not been alone. That was some comfort. Anyway, I did end up teaching them how to write. But it really got me thinking about things. Let's think about this. Let's say you have an English student, or somebody who we typically think of who struggles with basic math. What do you think would happen to that person if you put him into Calculus 2? I think that person would be writing dark poetry the rest of his life. Yes, indeed. Now let's think about the engineering side of things here. So we have an engineer or engineering student who's taking a class where it requires multi-page reference papers. So that requires research and all that, along with trying to write a cohesive paper. It's enough to make that person try to seek asylum in the lab. Unfortunately, even in the lab we have documentation. Just ask the technicians. They have plenty of documentation to do there. But nonetheless, you get the idea. It's a bit much to ask. And so in this class we start with something much more basic. We start with as far as writing, and then we move up into these more advanced things so that people are able to, engineering students are able to take on multi-page papers of any kind. Now here's another thing. What about a compelling motivation to be able to write? If you're watching this video, perhaps you're thinking, well, I have to write, it's required, but I don't really care about it. I want to do engineering. Fair enough. It's interesting to me that when I've tutored students in basic math, they've often said, where will I use this? How is this useful? Engineering students who are learning how to write will also say, where is this useful? How will I use it? Well, I'm here to tell you, writing and math are everywhere. Just look at the world around you. It's built using math and it's communicated using English a lot of times, right? So you're not going to get away with that kind of excuse. So you really do have to face it down. But wouldn't it be nice, and also if you think about in your career, you will have to write manuals, papers, all sorts of things, and if you get promoted to management, which many of you will, you'll have to be able to present on things, so you have to be able to speak as well as being able to write. But still, it seems like that's just a necessary evil, and not really something that's directly motivating to you, right? I'm here to tell you that writing is a useful tool in the lab. I'm not kidding either. The structure of the essay will help you set up a problem. In fact, the writing process will help guide you in your investigation. The structure of the essay will help you set up a problem and go through it step by step so that you're able to set up an overall problem, walk through it, and solve it. And so writing is really a useful tool in the lab, thankfully. Now let's address another area. What about confidence? Probably, if you're watching this, you lack a little confidence in your writing. What about that? What about that, Professor? Good question. By the time you're done with this, you'll have learned the basics of writing, such that you'll be able to take on any type or size of writing assignment, and you'll have the skills. Your writing skills will be kind of like basic algebra. In other words, you'll be as confident facing down writing assignments as you are facing down problems that involve basic algebra. You think about calculus, you may or may not remember that stuff. It's a lot to take in. But basic algebra, man, that stuff is like your bread and butter. You never forget that stuff, right? One thing I'd caution you on, though, for this class is you do have to have the patience to go back to basics. You have to have the patience to go back and learn the logical structure of the essay, or what I call the logical essay. You need to learn, technical writing is just a type of the logical essay. And so we're going to learn the logical essay from the ground up, so that in the end you'll be able to take on any type or size of writing assignment. True story. Now, I want to give you, we've gone through all that, we've gone through the motivation, so we have a motivation that's not just communication, it's engineering motivation. Now we've talked about confidence in writing. Now I want to give you a little overview of the class. In this class there are 4 things that you're going to learn. 3 of them you already know about, to some extent. It's the introduction, the body, and the conclusion. But the way we're going to approach this is we're going to take an engineering approach. And so we're going to look at this more in terms of problem solving, as well as we will look at these in terms of communicating. We're also going to look at the introduction and conclusion in kind of a unique way that I think will really help you write these and do a good job of communicating. Now what about that 4th component? The 4th component is one that's the secret sauce, and that is logic. We are going to learn how to use logic to glue one sentence to the next sentence to the next sentence. We are going to learn to use logic to glue one paragraph to the next paragraph. Basically, logic, we're going to learn how to use it to give us a cohesive paper overall. Now, like I said, you do have to have the patience to go back to the basics. So we're going to start with something small. Really small. The 3-sentence paragraph. Believe it or not, you can have all 4 components in a 3-sentence paragraph. So we're going to start with that and really cover some things in there. I encourage you to be patient and to bear with me on this, because there are some good foundational things you'll learn in that, and it'll be relatively quick. The next thing we're going to learn, so there's 4 things altogether, 4 stages in this class. The next thing we're going to tackle is the short paragraph. The short paragraph is 5 to 7 sentences. And it is the basic building block of writing. Once you learn how to write a short paragraph that's nice and cohesive, you're able to take on just about any writing assignment. Which brings us to the next assignment. The next stage will be the 3-paragraph paper. So I'll have a dedicated introduction, a dedicated body, a dedicated conclusion paragraph. And we'll learn how logic fits in on the sentence level, as well as going between paragraphs and on the paragraph level. So there's 3 areas where we learn how to use the logic there. On top of that, you'll learn how to really orient your reader using that introduction and give the reader good conclusion or good closure in the conclusion. What that does is, at the beginning, you get the reader interested in what you've written, and at the end, hopefully give that reader some confidence, and maybe that person will accept what you've written. That's the idea. The 4th stage is going to be the multi-page paper. To learn the basics, you don't need to do anything terribly huge, and so this is going to be only about 2 pages. 5 to 7 paragraphs. So, depending on how wordy you are, it could even be into 3 pages. 5 to 7 paragraphs means that we have an introduction, a conclusion, and 3 to 5 body paragraphs. This we'll use to learn how to step through a problem. So each body paragraph will be a stage in your problem. In other words, when you're solving, you go through 1 paragraph at a time, and each one will be a section of what you're solving overall. Though these things sound simple, they drill you in the basics. And after that, believe it or not, I guarantee you, you'll be able to take on any type or size of writing assignment. I have used these techniques to write something as small as a paragraph, obviously, and to write my master's thesis, which was about 60 pages, and my dissertation for my PhD, which was over 200 pages. Let's get started.